Hey there. We have an amazing guest today on the Scott Mann Podcast. We always have amazing guests, but this one is no exception. Ayman Kafel survived civil wars in Africa and Lebanon as a child before his family immigrated to the United States, under duress, I might add, like with just what they could carry on their back. And they immigrated to Boston in 1988. And after he witnessed the horrors of 9/11, he had grown up as a Muslim American in the Northeast. He saw what happened on 9/11. Like many Americans, he joined the military and went to fight. He fought in Iraq in 2005, came home to a pretty rough transition, and then he joined law enforcement in Massachusetts in 2007. And that began a whole journey for him, community-based policing, uniformed law enforcement, serving in a plainclothes unit, as a detective, as a DEA task force officer, as a DEA SRT operator, like their special tactics, and was an assistant team leader there. And then finally, as a Metro SWAT police operator as well. In addition to that, the strategic breadth and width of his thinking is astounding. He's a writer for the Havoc Journal. He's an author of the book, The Resolute Path, and the founder of Project Sapient, which is a podcast, a training, and consulting company as well. And you're going to see throughout this what makes this interview so compelling and Iman so engaging is just his emphasis on human connection and local engagement, where he's been in some of the roughest places on earth. And the lessons he's emerged with are something you're just not going to want to miss. And what was really cool was we had him and Ben Owen as the pairing behind the scenes. They met the night before this interview happened over at the house. We cooked, we had barbecue, we cooked burgers, and seeing a career law enforcement officer who had worked undercover with the DEA and had, engaged and booked all kinds of hardened drug addicts and dealers. And then seeing Ben Owen, someone who had been on the streets, who had been homeless, who was addicted, who found his way out of that. And both of them, this crazy passionate focus they have on helping lift people up out of those circumstances. It's astounding. And it's only found on Patreon. So you got to go there to see that engagement behind the scenes. But let's get things moving and get things rolling with this amazing interview with my friend Iman, and I'll see you on the other side. Hey everybody, welcome to the Scott Mann Podcast. It is awesome to have you here and sitting here with my buddy Iman, and we've actually covered a lot of ground just in the last 24 hours. Having you over at the house last night and just talking about everything from advocacy of our veterans and our first responders and their families to experiences overseas in the Middle East and, disconnection and conflict here at home and how we lead through it. I really want to try to get through most of that today. It's a fairly ambitious conversation, but when you hear about Iman's background and when you hear about the miles that he's run and you get his point of view, you'll see why I want to hit these things, because I know a lot of you watching these podcasts that those are the things that you care about. So this gentleman here has run a lot of miles, incurred a lot of scars, and developed a really, really awesome point of view on how to think about a lot of the things that keep us up at night. So, Iman, thank you first of all for being here. I'd like to start with, I'm a backstory guy. I'm a storyteller. Yeah. And I think it would be really great. One of the things that fascinates me is the number of folks in my life who I have such a profound respect for, who are war refugees, who immigrated under duress. Yeah. And you're one of those. So I wonder if we could start off your story. Tell us about that. Tell us about a little bit about your folks and what brought you here.
Yeah, absolutely. So my family's from Lebanon, southern part of Lebanon, in a village called Hanawai. And my dad was running businesses down in Africa, in Liberia. And so in the early 80s, so I was born in 81. So in the early 80s, life was great in Africa, and everything was good because there was still the civil war going on in Lebanon. So we were living in Africa. And what's funny is there's something you said yesterday to me that I was like, that's a great way of looking at it. You asked me about my conscious memories of the bat. And I'm like, I never thought of it that way. I'm like, that's true. Those are my only memories of seeing stuff at war, civil wars, was just a couple little things, but I'm sure I have deep inside so many more,
I guarantee
scars and whatever else.
Yeah.
The subconscious side that really saw some awful things probably.
There's the whole Jungian thing.
Exactly. So, so we were in Africa and everything was great, and Charles Taylor came into the picture, and just Civil War broke out. And
how old would you have been? Do you remember?
I was like 7, 8 years old.
Okay, got it.
So, so with us going back and forth, and it's funny, even though there's a civil war in Lebanon, we go back to Lebanon.
Of course, got roots there, family.
Exactly. And I don't remember what the ride was like from the airport to the village, because we're about an hour away from, more south, an hour away from the airport. So I can only imagine how long it actually took us to get to the village.
Right.
With the Civil War and everything. So we get to the, one of the, again, conscious memories I have is at the village in Lebanon, artillery strikes hitting side of a hill or a mountain. That's kind of what I was, remembering it as, is a mountain, and it would hit. And I was, playing on on one of those pedal cars, and I ran home, screaming and crying. And, the other memory I have is just the different guerrillas, coming through, guerrilla groups coming through the village, whether patrol or whatever. And you would hear, it's funny, you would hear, one of the villagers, one of the men in the village running through the village, almost like Paul Revere announcing the British are coming. But this one, he was like, whatever group it was, he would scream who it is through the village, and you'd see everyone start running into the houses. And I had no idea. I ran.
I want to put a pin in that, because I want to call something out here.
Yep.
Not put a pin in it. I want to call something out that we'll come back to, but I think a lot of people they don't understand that because you hear all this loose talk today of Civil War in America and all this. People have no clue what that actually looks like when in groups and out groups are fighting each other.
Yeah,
it's the people in the everyday that pay the price.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean pay it.
Absolutely. Like, and that's the thing. Like, I think of my memories. I mean, the other memory I have in Liberia when the Civil War broke out is, we had. My dad told me this. We had only hours to get out of the country. Hours. And we ended up, my dad was able to get a visa, like a war refugee. I forget exactly what it's called, but a visa to be able to come to the United States to escape. And, one of the memories I have is going down the stairs from where we lived. We had lived in like several condos, each floor was several. It was like a high rise with condos, stuff like that. And we ended up, going down the stairs. And I remember the soldier jumping off a deuce and half. Actually, I remember it's from my veranda. So looking down, and I was just kind of looking down, and soldier jumps off this, what I think is a deuce and half, or maybe even a 5, but he jumps down and blows up. A grenade blows him up. And what's funny is, again, the memory of it is he was there and then he wasn't.
Right.
That's what I remember. And then somehow.
So you're seeing this as a child, as you guys have hours to evacuate.
Yeah, hours to evacuate.
You see a guy literally vaporized with a grenade.
Yeah. Yeah. And we get to the U.S., and I tell people all the time, like, it was like, very hot in Africa.
Yeah.
So we land in Boston and during the winter. And so I've never seen snow. I don't know what cold is.
And you guys have lost everything.
we came with just what we could carry.
And I've been hearing that story a lot over the last 4 years with the Afghanistan collapse, and I cannot imagine what that must have been like for your parents and to have to load you guys up and throw what you can in a bag and not even really know where you're going.
No, I mean, the only reason I asked my dad, why did we come to Boston? The only reason is because my uncle was on a student visa at Suffolk University doing computer engineering. That's the only reason we came to Boston, because that's what my dad knew.
That's what he knew. Yeah. He knew somebody there, and then he had kin there.
Yep.
But and then you all went from a pretty good life, even though you were in Civil War, to you've lost everything.
Pretty much. We were living in a studio apartment in Boston. It was me at the time. It was just my brother. My mom was pregnant with my sister at the time when we escaped, and 2 of my uncles. We were in a studio. Like, there was 7 of us.
This would have been when, about
88, 89.
Okay, and you were talking about the cold when you arrived.
Yeah. It was. We had to go to for people who know Boston, we went to what I remember, Downtown Crossing. It's right in the center of the city near the Boston Common. And we went into like Filene's basement. And I remember my first jacket was this huge bomber jacket, like looked like a World War II. Like it had patches and stuff like that. Like that was my first like winter jacket I ever owned, and it was actually pretty cozy because it was so cold. I had finally bundled up. I'm like, oh, this feels great. And then I'll never forget, I'm walking through Downtown Crossing, and at the time they had the Santa scene. I've never seen anything like this, you know. So I'm like mesmerized. And you know,
you're a young kid.
I was a young kid, so like these types of things I never saw in my life. So people tell me, like, you know, it's funny, like friends of mine would tell me how they grew up in this country. And I'm like, I didn't grow up like that. Like for us, like, you know, I remember my dad would tell me at the village in Lebanon, there was only like 1 or 2 TVs and that's it.
Okay.
And black and white, you know.
So you're also Muslim. Your family's Muslim. Was devout? Was your family devout Muslim? So as you come to America, that's got to be a bit of a clash of realizations coming from both the Middle East and Africa. Devout Muslim, and then in coming to a predominantly Christian country and seeing things on display you'd never seen before. How did your family and you kind of reconcile that, deal with that? What was that like for you as a kid?
So what's funny is when we came here, I went to Catholic school. Okay. Because Catholicism is very close with Islam.
100%.
Right? So, and I think that's what people don't realize on how closely connected Catholicism and Islam actually is. And so I went to Catholic school, and the Catholic school that was in Somerville, Mass, St. Polycarp. It's actually now like a apartment building or whatever. But that's where I went. I went to St. Polycarp School, and it was so to me, I didn't really think much of it. And my parents, it's because, well, Catholicism is the closest to Islam, makes sense to send me to Catholic school. And the Catholic school accepted me, you know, to go to the school.
Imagine that.
So I went through Catholic school, I think I was in the 1st and 2nd grade. Okay. And then we ended up moving because we had to relocate so many times when I was a kid. Is that right? Just to figure out
what to do.
What to do. Like, just because at the time, I remember when we first came, my dad had like 2 or 3 jobs. I would hardly see him. Yeah. He would work as a security guard overnight, and he would work as a cab driver during the day.
And this is a guy who was a very successful businessman.
Yeah, I mean, eventually we got to a good spot where, because that's the thing, I think, work ethic and stuff like that, we all have that. Yeah. And he worked very hard to get us out of wherever we were living into like a home. So it's like it's that American dream that we lived it.
It's like my buddy Nizam, who was one of the passenger number 1 on the Pineapple Express. You know, today he's a single dad driving he drives a tractor trailer down in Texas, and he gets up in the morning, he takes his 3 kids to school. Yep. He comes home, he drives his load. Yep. Gets straight back, unhooks the truck, goes and gets the kids, comes back, helps them with their work. Yep. And he's exhausted, but he has the biggest grin on his face all the time because he knows what he's providing for his kids. He knows what he's carving out for them.
Exactly, and that's kind of
your dad was that way.
Yeah, my dad was that way. Like you could totally tell.
Mom too.
Mom also. Mom was stay at home. Yeah. You know, I'll take that back. She worked a little bit at like a grocery store, like a bagger at the grocery store. Again, we were just starting. We're like trying to figure everything out. You know, and new to the country and. Part of like one memory I have in elementary school is I would all of a sudden switch from English to Arabic and I'm like, oh crap, I got to switch back to English to talk more English. So that was like one of the funny memories.
How did you do with that? Did you assimilate? Did you get along pretty well with other kids? Was it tough being having immigrated to the U.S. from?
It wasn't as a kid. I didn't really feel any real like backlash, if you want to call it, or anything. Nothing that I could really remember because we were so like I was so like if you want to call it like mesmerized by everything in America. At the time I thought Boston was America. Right. Because people would ask me like, oh, where do you live? Oh, I live in America. Like, no, you live in Boston, but where? I was like, Boston. No, I live in America. Like to me, when I was a kid, that's all I kept saying.
One of the things that I know you, like so many people, 9/11 had a pretty profound effect on you. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that, kind of where you were in your life when that happened? And because you grew up a Muslim American, your family's figuring it out, that your dad eventually makes it back to a level that, he wouldn't be surprising of an entrepreneur in any country. Yeah. But 9/11, how did that affect you?
So I was at college at the time. I was a first year and also a freshman in college.
And what were you planning on doing, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I was actually studying psychology.
Okay. That was the path you were heading.
Yeah, path I was headed to psychology because I fell in love with psychology in high school. They had us do like a psychology 101 and 102. Yeah. And I fell in love with it because then I was fascinated with how the mind works. Like
you
truly
still are.
fast. And I am. So it's like, that's the nerd side of me where I really
same.
Yeah, do a deep dive into the mind, and so it made sense for me to actually be a psychologist, do something in that field. So that's what I wanted to do. But deep down inside, though, one thing I always knew is there was something missing. Deep down inside, I'm like, I want to be a psychologist, I want to do this, but there's something inside me that wants to like claw itself out.
Interesting.
And 9/11 happened. I remember I was on my way to school, and I had my CD, and I wasn't listening to the news. I was just driving, making my way. I pull into the parking lot of college, and I see all these kids running out of the school. And I'm like, I see one of my buddies. I'm like, hey, dude, what's going on? He's like, bro, we're under attack. Go home. They shut the school down. I'm like, under attack? What the fuck? Like, okay. I get in my car. I throw the radio on, and sure enough, I'm hearing everything. I remember I got home. It was really quiet at the house. Really quiet, because especially as time progressed, found out it was Al-Qaeda and, Muslims that boarded the plane and all that. And honestly, it was a lot of worry now. We're like, shit. We're like, are we going to be targeted?
Right.
We like, all of a sudden, it went to thinking about concentration camps.
Because the country was pissed. Yeah. Yeah. And okay, so continue.
That's the thing. We were thinking, like, in my head, I'm like, God damn, like, are we going to end up in concentration camps? Are we going to, like, but that was the fear that we all had.
Which happened with Japanese Americans during World War II.
That's what we were thinking about. And at the time, we were still only green card holders at 9/11. So it really was like, man, they're going to revoke, like, they're going to get rid of us. We're gone. And, so it's one of those things where in my head, I'm like, you know what? I'm joining the military. Because I had a couple reasons. One, because we got attacked, and we came to a place to live peacefully that now got attacked.
Did you feel that any crisis of faith in that sense? That was there, in other words, and what I mean by that is not a crisis in your faith, but maybe a conflict. Did you feel in any way like, is this going to be challenging for me because of the fact that it was perpetrated by Muslims and, they were evoking a radical version of Islam, and you're a practicing Muslim, which has nothing to do with what they did. Yeah. But did you feel like, is this going to, like, did that come up in your thought calculus as you thought about joining?
Absolutely. I thought about it. I was like, but part of that thought process was, well, I need to show the country that there are good Muslims who will step up when it comes time for it. And that's kind of one of the things I wanted to do, and show the world, or the U.S. or whoever, like, no, there's a group of us that will fight back. Like, we're not allowing what's going on in our homes overseas to make it its way here to a place where we grew up now and we became successful and we're contributing to this society. And, hell no, it's not happening on our watch. Yeah. So that's kind of how I eventually rationalized it in my head. And
do you remember how pervasive, regardless of religion, I've talked to so many guys and girls after 9/11 that joined and went to war. And, our whole lives changed after that. Yeah. But just those two words of never again. Yeah. And never forget. Yeah. It's hard to describe that to people that weren't around during that time. Yeah. But boy, it sure was a pervasive feeling, wasn't it?
It was. And it was a lot of, obviously, anger in the country. Yeah. A lot of, and, when that call came in, from the president, from the country, we're like, yep, absolutely. I mean, I didn't even hesitate. I remember going to college, and first recruiting desk I found was the Army. I'm like, yep, let's go. Like, I didn't care who I joined with. Yeah. But it just so happened the Army was like right there. I'm like,
so you joined up. How did that go? Like, what did you?
So that was a lot of conflict with my family on that end. Joining.
Really?
Oh yeah. Well, part of it, which I get, they don't, because I knew. So I always say to veterans, like, especially GWAT vets, like, especially after 9/11, if you join the military to just do the college thing and not think you're going to go to war after 9/11, like, you're sorely mistaken. Like, there's a reason why like I knew I was going to go to war regardless, like whether it was Afghanistan at the time, Iraq was still kind of brewing a little bit. I was like, regardless whether Afghanistan, Iraq, or I don't care where, send me to Africa, wherever the fight is, I'm going to go.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of conflict even within the community, and especially on the radical side.
Right.
And I remember I was called a traitor. I was called this. In my head, I was like, assholes. I'm like, you guys are living here free of this shit, and you're calling me a traitor?
Wow.
I was like, why don't you go back then? Go back to Egypt or wherever, wherever.
And one of your buddies did?
One of my buddies did.
You want to talk about that for a sec?
Yeah. So in high school, this was like, sophomore, junior, senior year, like I was really close friends with this kid.
This is prior to 9/11.
Prior to 9/11. And his name is Ahmed Abu Samra. You can actually look him up. You'll see his Wikipedia, whatever it is, like, who he was and when he got killed. But he became radicalized. Like, me and him were these happy-go-lucky dudes, like, playing sports, doing the usual stuff kids do, right? High schoolers do, getting ourselves in trouble, doing whatever, doing the typical things. And I remember one summer, so every summer I would work with my dad, like, because he had several businesses. I'd go to, like, whether it's the Cape Cod area or wherever, I'll just be busy for the summer, working 80, 90-hour weeks, just helping my dad. And when I came back to school, he changed completely. Dressed traditional garb, like Islamic garb, grew a beard all of a sudden, became very radicalized. Like, you felt it, you saw it. And
you can feel it.
Yeah. And I'm like, man, what the hell? And so he's Sunni and I'm Shiite, right? And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, what the hell just happened to him? And I've always had this feeling. There's a mosque that we would go to in Sharon at the time, years ago, over a decade ago, a couple decades ago. They had some really radicalized type people going, infiltrating that mosque. And I'll never forget sitting. And my dad would send me to, every Friday night, just go hang out with, my friends, whatever, which at the time I was fine with. But then I started to realize, I'm like, this is not, I don't like coming here.
Well,
just hearing the conversations in the mess hall, well, I call it mess hall military. So in the cafeteria, just hearing the conversations. And I remember one conversation, there was this one guy he was arguing with another Muslim. I'll never forget his words. His words were, if you are not a Muslim, you deserve to die. Those were his exact words. The other guy was like, why? I was like, what kind of thought process is that?
Yeah.
And he's like, what do you mean by that? If you're not Muslim, you deserve to die. So there was a clear conflict. And I'm like, I couldn't believe hearing that myself.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is not a good spot. So people like that infiltrated that community got to some of the kids.
Yeah.
And especially, him, Ahmed Abu Samra, like, he ended up trying to join Taliban, tried to join Al-Qaeda. He finally made his way to ISIS and ended up getting killed by a drone strike, I believe it was. He was one of I believe, the creators of the ISIS newsletter, and also would do the social media. Which is still
very prominent.
Yeah, very prominent, exactly. And he did a lot of their social media, so those sickening videos of people being burned alive or whatever, he was one of the people that would edit the videos and put it together. So to me, it was good riddance when I found out he died.
Yeah, it's interesting. And so, I think about you guys growing up together, high school together, practicing the same faith. 9/11 happens. It's a catalyst moment for both of you.
Yeah.
You go one direction, he goes the other direction.
Yeah.
You both go to war.
Yeah.
Isn't that? I mean, and you both came from the same streets, the same school.
Yeah.
And so you joined up. What happens next? What MOS and how did that go?
Yeah. So I joined up, and it's interesting. So at the time, I joined. I wanted to do any type of job, like anything that combat related, and recruiters being recruiters put me in field artillery.
Okay.
I was like, oh, okay, cool. I get to blow shit up. That's awesome. Let's do it. Went field artillery. And one thing and I'm the only one in my family to ever join any sort of military.
Yeah.
Any sort of military. So I go to boot camp on my own. Like, I had no idea, Fort Sill, Oklahoma is where I went. I did the full OSUT, 3-month or, where they do basic AIT. So I did the full thing. And I remember getting there. And again, there was part of me like a little worried if people found out I'm Muslim, like, is it going to be an issue? And sure enough, no one cared. You know, no one really, because we all bleed
Yep.
green, and that's when I really got
all
to,
equally worthless in the beginning, right?
exactly. But that's the thing. Like the first thing that's one of the things I noticed was, and I appreciated how the military was in that sense. Like we don't care. Like, I remember our drill sergeants, you know, during one of their many smoke sessions or whatever, you know, part of their conversation with us was, we don't care. You know, we don't care if you're black, white, doesn't matter. He's like, you bleed green, and that's all that matters.
You know, one of my buddies back on this wall here, Cliff Patterson, was my Ranger buddy, and he was, you know, we could not have been more opposite in terms of like what you see superficially, right? He was African American, was a redneck from Arkansas, and from the time we met each other in Ranger School, you know, like we just had this kind of thing where if you saw us talking to each other, you would think like we didn't like each other.
Yeah.
But the bond was so deep that we could actually, it was so comical.
Yeah.
Those things that we really knew each other at such a, because we just been through so much in Ranger School as buddies. And it's just lasted for years, you know? And I can remember one time the guy went back to Western North Carolina with me for Christmas. Because he didn't have any place to go at Christmas. We were at Fort Benning, and I loaded him up, and we went back, and we stopped at a gas station in North Georgia, and we were going inside to, you know, I was like, I got to go to the bathroom, and so I get out, and he's walking like right behind me, and I was like, dude, I got to go to the bathroom. He's like, motherfucker, you ain't leaving me anywhere, you know. But it just you know, he was killed on 9/11, you know, and at his office in the Pentagon, and it changed my life, man. But I just what you're saying resonates so deeply with me because all I know is I miss him.
Yeah.
You know, I don't, and it's just the military, and I know it has its issues like any other organization, but there really is something about shared suffering.
Yes.
And how it allows us to get past all that other bullshit.
Exactly. And that's the thing. It's, you know, I remember before we went across the tracks, you know, we were in, I forget what it's called, but kind of like the pre-basic or whatever. So you got your 1 week of getting your uniforms or whatever. And I forget, like the night before we found out we're going across the tracks, where they bring up the cattle cars and you load up in the cattle cars and stuff like that. And we all said a prayer. Yeah. Jew, Christian, and then they come to me. They're like, hey, is there a prayer you could say in, you know, Islam? I said, yeah. So I read the Fatiha. You know, I recited the Fatiha. And everyone said amen, and that's it. And I'm like, this is awesome. Yeah. Like, I didn't feel any like discrimination, like nothing. Sure. They were really, you know, liking or loving the fact. And then you ended up deploying to Iraq. Yeah. As a field artillery. Yep. Field artillery. So we got assigned, actually at the time in 2005, we got assigned to a military brigade, 18th MP Brigade. Okay. And so most of my unit were doing detainee ops, but the battalion commander found out I speak fluent Arabic. Yeah. So he plucked me right out of my unit and said, you're working for me now. Okay. And so I went all over the country. It was actually quite the experience. Seeing it. Did a lot of local engagement. Tons of local engagement. And seeing on that side, and my battalion commander, Colonel Dan McElroy, is retired. I'm still, like, the bond we have, like, brotherhood. Like, I talk to him all the time, even to this day. And, you know, he was nonstop. I'd hear the radio go off at like 1:30 in the morning. Hey, let's go, mount up. We're gonna go do some patrolling. Like, he was a battalion commander that would actually go out on patrols too. Yeah, and you rolled with him, and you were obviously. I mean, that's a massive asset. I mean, a translator is great. Yeah. But having a solid NCO, who speaks Arabic. Yeah. And who can engage at that level. Yeah. That's part of the command. Yeah. I mean, that's a whole different thing, and I suspect he employed it that way. Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, he still had his own interpreter. Ali, of course, nice, like awesome dude. Ali grew up in D.C. He's from Sudan, like really good dude. But I was like I was the one who had the military side of me too. Yeah, so I was able to also converse with various other units in Iraq. And at the same time, I'd get used by different groups, whether it's human intel, again, like I told you earlier, SF crew that would come through asking for intel. And
Yeah,
stuff
and
like
I've seen this. Legend did a version of this. He was a linguist, but he was also an Army NCO, and so he was empowered. Did you find that you were able to just kind of run the seams? Is that what your boss allowed you to do? And is that how you did it?
Yeah, it was fun. So I think back, I'm like, man, I was like 21, 22 years old, and I was given such long leash.
Yeah, sure.
Because again, it comes with trust, right? If my battalion commander thought I was like some nitwit, I wouldn't do half of what I was able to do, or he wouldn't even use me the way I was being employed. But I think because I had a good head on my shoulders, I guess, or whatever it is, I was allowed to do a lot.
Okay.
And especially with him. And
what kind of things would you like? Give us some examples.
Yeah. So we would go to different IP stations, meet with the.
What does that stand for?
Iraqi police stations.
Got it, okay.
So the IP stations. So we would go there and we would talk to whether it's the chiefs or whoever it is, and just kind of see what's going on. Like, hey,
I think they called it atmospherics, right?
Yeah. And really, my job, I felt, was to get the pulse of the area.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like to really see.
That matters. Context is everything.
Exactly.
Right?
To really see, and I felt that I really needed to be out there a lot more than, I couldn't stay inside the wire, obviously, because that's useless to me. And the battalion commander felt the same way as a commander. He needed to be out there all the time.
And did you feel like you were at a pretty heightened sense of danger when you were doing that? I mean, you had to have been pretty heavily targeted as you're doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, so at the time, I think at the time, like if you were an interpreter, Al-Qaeda had like $100,000 hit on you or whatever.
Yeah.
So I knew I was a target anywhere I went. But at the same time, it really never hit me like that because I had a job to do. Like if I had to think about all the dangers every time I went outside the wire, in the wire, whatever, we wouldn't get any work done.
Yeah.
So I would go around and sometimes I'll talk to villagers too.
Sure.
I'll get with the village elders. I remember Marine Human Intel needed my help. They needed to meet with the village elders, and they're like, "Hey, it'd be awesome if you come with us, so we can talk to them." And you being, they know you, they're familiar with you. Can you, I was like, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I went out with them, and they were looking for intel on some high value targets and stuff like that. But and it's funny, and you know this, like whenever you go, you're going to spend 2 to 3 hours there because before you even start talking
There's
work,
no short form communication.
Exactly. Before you even start talking work,
yeah,
you got to talk about everything else.
Well, yeah, because that's an important point, man. Because our through line is human connection, and this is the thing that I would always be astounded with is I would be sitting in an engagement or a conversation, and even the fact that we called these things key leader engagements to me formalized it to such a degree that you really missed the real essence of it, which was a conversation to build social capital, to build relationship, to build trust, and the relationship is the asset, not your agenda.
Exactly.
And that takes a while, man. Particularly when you are in a status honor-based society, whether that's Appalachia or East LA. Or Boston, parts of Boston, or parts of Iraq. How you make a connection in the local fabric of the community is a long game, not a short game.
It is a very long game, and it took me, thinking about it now, it took a while because, like I said, it's a long game. One, they're trying to see what I'm about. I'm seeing what they're about. Like it's also this chess game too.
Yeah, but you had that patience.
But I had the patience, because one, I really was genuine on wanting to help.
Yeah.
I'll give you a couple examples where going into villages and these some of these Iraqis would recognize me, and I always went by my first name. So I ripped off my name tag, which I was allowed to. I said, hey, I don't want them to know my last name.
Yeah, of course.
First name is fine. So I actually got a new name tag with just my first name, right on my IBA, so the body armor.
Yeah.
So went in and they're like, Iman. I'm like, hey, what's going on? And they'll ask me like they need whether it's chlorine for the water or whatever they need, medicine, whatever, and I'd give it to them. Like, yeah, absolutely, here you go. Kind of goodwill, a little, winning hearts and minds all the time. And that's one example. Another example is I felt bad for this one kid. I don't know if he had like cerebral palsy or something. Young Iraqi kid. He couldn't walk. His legs were just couldn't walk, and he didn't have a wheelchair, didn't have crutches. Like his dad would carry him everywhere.
Yeah.
And I felt bad for this kid. So me and a buddy of mine, we basically I'll call it acquired a wheelchair from our
acquisition's a beautiful thing, my friend.
Acquired a wheelchair from our medic tent, and we threw it in the gun truck and took it to him and gave it to the kid, and the dad was so ecstatic, happy, whatever.
Absolutely.
And
reciprocity is a beautiful thing, my
exactly.
friend.
And the thing is, though, like, that's when I started to really get good information.
Yeah.
And it's just through conversation.
Yeah.
I wasn't really, and I did it in a way where didn't make it seem like I was digging.
Yeah.
It was just a conversation.
The relationship's the asset.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And, when they felt the need to give me info, they'll give me info.
A lot of people would say, well, that's nation building, man. We shouldn't be doing that. And while there are merits to that conversation, you got to look at what the enemy does. Al-Qaeda in Iraq, Al-Qaeda in Syria, ISIS, K, all of these bad actors who can project threats globally on us here at home, they set up shop in those places where they set up shop in undergoverned, at-risk areas.
Yes.
And so if there is not, an antibody to that established safe haven, then they have unfettered opportunity to strike us here.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of people don't get that, is that kind of work, whether that's special forces doing that, whether that's the host nation's special forces doing that, or a field artillery guy from Boston. If you don't go local, you have no business in the game.
Exactly.
It's not just surgical strike.
Exactly.
Right?
That's why I always tell people, like it's to me, the surgical strike has a time and place and all that, but the real work is the conversations. Is that
really
human
is,
connection?
man.
It's that
by, with, and through.
Exactly.
Human engagement, social capital, reciprocity, and I think that's true not just in conflict zones. I think anywhere where humans live. As a way of being in the world, that's a better way of being in the world than being coercive. Do you agree with that?
Oh, 100%.
You've seen a lot of violence. You've done the highest level of training in law enforcement and SWAT, and so you've thumped heads. I've thumped heads, not to the degree that you have, but I can honestly say, coercion is not my preferred course of action when I'm dealing with another human.
No, and that's the thing is, I kind of realized early on in my life, especially in military overseas, and I'm like, humans we're very simple. There's like 3 or 4 things that we really need, and we're happy. That's security, safety, security, food, electricity, water, and that's really it. It's those 4 things.
Yeah.
As long as you have it as a human, you're good.
Yeah.
You get to live your life and all that. When those things start to break down, you see the chaos.
And bad actors exploit it.
Exactly.
And so did you find that start to shape how you navigated the world as a law enforcement officer?
Oh, yeah. I took a lot of lessons learned from my time overseas and apply it.
You come home from Iraq. Was that tough to come home?
Yeah. I never realized how it actually affected me, being at that such high op tempo.
Yeah.
I came home, and at the time, the military had no real plan for us.
What year would that have been?
Beginning of 2006 is when I got
They had
home.
nothing.
There was nothing. They gave us a 2-week reintegration program into society.
Plus, you were in the reserves, right?
Yes, in the Guard.
In the Guard.
Yeah.
And so there's no standing mechanism in your community or anything like that?
There was nothing. So we go back to Fort Dix, that our demobilization site. So that's where we moved out of, was Fort Dix, New Jersey. Came back to Fort Dix, New Jersey. And the Army did a 2-week, let's reintegrate back into society. But we're still living on base. We're still doing marching around. We're still doing this, still doing that. I was like, and later on in life, I'm like, how's that in reintegration? You're still in the military. You're still acting like you're in the military. You're still waking up at 05 for formation for no reason. Like, we just got back from war. Why am I up at 05 to get into formation? But that's the way it was. And I'll never forget, we had the VA, we had various other organizations come in through to talk to us during the demob. And in reality, it was all check the box. Like, you had this long sheet, and as long as you check it, you're able to get off.
So they can say they did that if something bad happens.
Exactly. And I remember the VA rep was up on the stage, and one of the things he said, like, you guys just came back, and was giving us a talk and everything, and says, we have these booths set up, and, if you have issues, please come talk to us and tell us. And, if you are in fact having issues, you'll stay on base while we treat you. And everyone was thinking, like, stay on base. I want to go home. So there was only one guy that actually brought up his issues, they ended up keeping him on Fort Dix, and we went home.
Yeah.
And later on, I don't know if this is true or not or whatever, but we learned that he ended up getting put into a detail platoon, where it was basically guys who didn't want to go to war, deserters or whatever it was. They put him in that, and he was like doing labor. And I'm like, how did you help a guy like that who just came back from war, and you put him in a platoon full of whatever malcontents or whatever, and make him do like labor? You know,
I know there certainly was and still is to some degree a stigma just around any kind of mental health thing in the military and transition. I can't imagine what it must have been like in 2006.
Oh, I was angry when I came home. But again, it was because I was so hypervigilant.
You still single at that point?
Yeah, I was still single at that point. But I was so hypervigilant.
Yeah.
I remember, I came back to live with my parents, and I still had my siblings. I have 2 brothers, 2 sisters. And man, I was so angry, and I would punch holes in walls. Like this shit I've never used to do.
Right.
And that's when I started to realize, I got issues, man. I gotta go look into it. And then that's when I really started exploring the mind and all that stuff.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's when I started to kind of do a lot of self work.
Did you find it was hard to find opportunities for help?
Yeah. It was.
You had to really seek it out.
You really had to seek it out
because there really wasn't a pre-existing network to help you navigate it at all, right?
No,
folks weren't really talking about it.
No, I remember at the time when we had Yahoo email. Couple of guys from my unit sent out email, like a mass email. He's like, "Hey, is anybody else angry, or is anybody else this, or anybody else feeling that?" And I'm like, yeah, hell yeah. I'm feeling this, and it kind of to navigate that.
Thank God you guys did that.
Yeah, I mean, it was just one of those things where I realized, as the years progressed, that I'm not the only one feeling those things.
When I got out in 2013, I had a similar experience in that I really lost my way, lost my purpose, lost my identity, and almost took my life as a result of it, and just a real state of depression. And I look back on it now, and it's almost like being outside my body looking back at it. Like it's really hard to imagine. I mean, I still have those times, but it was dark, and I never thought I would find myself in that place. And I think a lot of us that happens is that we think that's just not going to happen to us, and then when it does, you start to think something's wrong with you.
Yeah,
and there's not really anybody to talk to about it.
Exactly.
So you don't want to talk about it.
No, I mean, we grew up in that sort of suck it up, buttercup type thing, right?
For sure.
It is what it is.
You don't want to be a victim,
exactly.
And I'm not a fan of victimhood, but that's not what that is.
No,
right? That's a real thing that's actually standing between you and getting back in the game.
Yeah.
So how did you get back in the game? And was it law enforcement that
it was? So again, it's funny. Like my career path went a whole different direction than being a psychologist. So a buddy of mine that I was deployed with, he was a cop with the transit police up in Boston.
Okay.
And he calls me one day. He's like, "Iman, you should become a cop." I'm like, "Why?" He says, he's like, "Man, you have an instinct that should be in law enforcement."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Oh, okay, I'll give it a whirl, see what the hell happens." And so at the time, if you were a combat vet and came, you could still do the civil service exam. It doesn't matter when, as long as you have your order showing that you were deployed. Then they're like, "Oh yeah, they'll give you your own appointment to take the civil service exam." So I did all that and finally made my way to become a cop. One of the things I was worried about is during the psychological, right? Is like, oh man, I went to war and seen all this shit. So obviously, like any other combat vet, probably omitted a lot of information, a lot of things, exactly. And so it's like, made it through. I made it through the psychological, made it through. I'm at the academy, everything's good. And, it's kind of like I found my purpose again.
Okay.
In that environment. And because it's an environment that I recognized.
Right.
And that's all it was. It's because I think if we had processes in place early on, I may not have become a cop, because then I'd have other avenues to find purpose. At the time, I was kind of like this rudderless ship, just kind of moseying around, trying to figure out what the hell to do next. Because, when I went back to my job after deployment, I remember sitting there dealing with just like bullshit.
Yeah,
and
it doesn't even matter.
That's the thing. I'm like, man, I know I gave you the morning band, but one of the names on there, he died a month before we got home.
Yeah.
And so I'm, all that's fresh in my head, and I'm like, what the hell am I doing here?
Yeah.
You know, that was the question I had. I was like, why am I here?
Yeah.
You know, and that's the whole thing. Like
That's
suicide.
a tough question to answer at that point.
Exactly.
In your life.
That's the thing. Suicidal, you know, ideation, all that shit. Like it was hitting me.
That was
hard,
all hitting you.
You know, because I was like, why am I here?
Right.
Because I had guys that got killed, yet I survived. You know, survivors killed.
So the guilt's
Exactly.
rolling in.
Oh, guilt's rolling in big time. And at the time, I was still in the Guard, but then what I ended up doing in the Guard is I joined the Army Honor Guard in Massachusetts and started doing funerals for soldiers.
Wow.
And part of it was me giving back to the fallen because we didn't have time to mourn when we were overseas.
No.
Guy got killed. We still got missions to do.
Ramp
we're still
ceremony.
working. Exactly. And that's it.
Yep.
And you're back at it, you know, doing your missions.
Yeah.
So I felt that I needed to do something for fallen soldiers. And I ended up joining Army Honor Guard. And one of the, I'll show you a picture of it later, but there's a Boston Globe picture of me carrying a casket of a 19-year-old Army kid who got killed IED strike. And it was raining that day, and you could see you couldn't see my face, but you could tell like, damn, you know, like 19 years old, what the hell, you know, kind of doesn't make sense. And it was and I was I would fold the flag.
Did it help you doing that, or did it? What was the effect?
It helped in a sense where I was able to mourn.
Okay.
Like I could stop doing what I'm doing. My time is now with this soldier and his family or her family, and really gave me time to reflect.
Do you mind if we talk about that for a second? Yeah. Because this is something, you know, with the play, right? Yeah. And so I just so relate to what you're talking about with the taking the time to mourn, you know, and this is something that Dr. Diego and I talk a lot about. He's our resident psychologist in our nonprofit.
Yep.
And he's traveled with us with the play. What I've found on the road is when we talk to veterans, when we talk to families of the fallen, military families, you know, they're buttoned up. They're doing what the good trooper's supposed to do. They're carrying the load. They're taking care of everybody. And they have not experienced the emotional access necessary to metabolize that grief, metabolize that trauma, and move on. Yep. And somehow, I believe, in our civil society of transactions and mass communications and, you know, bullet points and selfies and duck lips, we have convinced ourselves that having that emotional response is a bad thing, or it is unhealthy, or it is weakness, or even worse, something bad's going to happen to you. Yeah. Whereas in reality, every psychologist, counselor, trauma expert, neuroscientist, including, you know, Dr. Pate that I've talked to and that you're so good friends with, like they all say essentially the same thing, which is it's a biological necessity.
It is. For
us to move on. Yeah. Like, and there are so many people that are just not either able to do it or they're not allowing themselves to do it. And that thing's going to find itself into the world in some rough ways, man.
Oh, yeah.
So it is good that you did that, but it certainly, I'm sure, was tough at the time.
It was, and you know, the toughest part for me as folding the flag was, you know, once Taps is done played, it was now it's the realization of the family that this is it. Yeah. And the crying really, because now it's quiet because you're doing the flags folding ceremony. I get chills right now just thinking about it, because the family, like, that's the realization. Yeah, man. Their loved one is gone now. Yeah. And like I said, I'm getting goosebumps because it's a tough.
We have that scene in the play.
Yeah.
We actually have a flag presentation in the play with Taps and the salute, because presented to a mom and a son. Yeah. You know why? Because most people have never seen it.
No. And for me,
they should know what it is.
Yeah. And that's the thing for me. For the first one I ever did, it was more like a World War II vet we did, you know. So it wasn't, that one wasn't like, it wasn't tough, but the young guys, the young veterans.
Yeah, the fresh combat loss.
Exactly. Yeah. Those were the tough ones.
And I'm the same way. Like, in fact, we laid to rest Chris Piper in Marblehead.
Yep.
And he was from that area, and I was the escort officer.
Yep.
I'll never forget when the bagpipes started playing the Ballad of the Green Berets, and Amazing Grace.
Yeah.
And we were marching as a procession, and I looked over at his 12-year-old son. I think he was around 12. And that little guy just fell apart as we were walking.
Yeah.
And it just broke me, dude. To this day, I can't even think about it without really getting emotional. And so I imagine doing that but that was necessary for you.
Yeah.
Right. And so that coupled with going into law enforcement, talk about your law enforcement journey a little bit. And what did you pursue and what was that like for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I started early on and, you know, in the transit police, I think I was 26, 27 years old, somewhere around there when I started. And I was working right in the heart of Boston. And I loved it. I was like having a blast because it was like that adrenaline feel I needed. Like I needed that.
Kind of back in the mix.
Back in the mix. I needed to feel the chaos. Because for me, I'm sure you, like I thrive under chaos. So throw 100 things at me and I'll navigate my way through it, you know? Yeah. And it's not about, to me, a close friend of mine, Freddie Leland, he describes, he's a retired police lieutenant. He describes chaos as not something to be controlled, but to be reshaped.
To surf it.
Exactly. and it's so, and I like that because I used to say, oh yeah, you know, you can control the chaos. And he's like, no, you don't control chaos. He says, you ride it, you surf it, you reshape it at your will.
Yeah.
You know, not the other way. And I'm like, that's a good way of, you know, describing it. So that's the thing. That's what I thrive on doing is those split-second decision-making and stuff like that. And so in my law enforcement career, so I started out off at patrol. And I worked in Boston for like 3 years, but then a couple friends of mine worked for another department, like a smaller city department. And they're like, hey, you need to come over here, man. Let's work together. Let's do this. Let's do that. I'm like, all right. So, you know, I transferred over and went to them. It's the city of Attleboro, which is right at the Rhode Island border. So I went and worked there and started uniform patrolling, you know, doing my thing. And my chief has been, you know, he's been really good to me because I think, again, he liked the work that I do, not just, going out there, arresting people, doing whatever, but at the same time.
So this is an extension of what you were doing in Iraq,
exactly.
That community engagement, outreach, local relationships.
Exactly. And I was doing it all on my own. Not under direction of anybody, really, but just me.
How you navigated the world.
Yeah, exactly. Just how I did. I'd get out, even like at the trailer parks, I'll get out and talk to people and, you know, have my relationships with them and, you know, whatever, even in uniform patrol. And because to me, I never had an issue, especially after Iraq, talking to people.
Right.
Like I talk to anybody. It doesn't really matter to me who you are, what you do, whatever. You know, I could talk to anybody. So I went and at the time the chief started a plainclothes unit. Basically, it's called problem-oriented policing, and it was me, a sergeant, and another officer. Interestingly, all combat vets in that unit, and our mandate was solve problems, basically. You know, in a nutshell. And we're like, okay, so
like
we're
an action
plainclothes,
group.
So we're plainclothes, you know, he told us, you guys are plainclothes, you know, driving unmarked cars. And I'm like, all right, so not so much we started it off as kind of like a DA group, like direct action, right? We were like, all right, we're going to go warrant arrest, do this, do that. And then we scale it back a little. We're like, wait a minute, that's not doing I don't think that's
not getting it done.
That's not getting it done. Let's think about how we want to actually do this. Because it was such a brand new type idea that we were trying to figure out too. Even the chief was trying to figure out. He's like, hey, you know, there's a reason why I chose you guys. Like, figure it out. Let me know how you guys figure it out. So I remember one day we were sitting in the office, me and my partner, and we're looking back and forth. We're like, it just kind of hit me out of nowhere about my time overseas. So, you know, I was thinking about like how I dealt with certain issues overseas. And I'm like, hey, why don't we use Special Forces doctrine? Like, you know, UW, unconventional warfare, winning hearts and minds, you know, stuff, you know, certain things that SF does that have been doing it for the last 60 years, you know, since the 60s. Why don't we do that? And we're like, yep, let's do it. So we completely changed kind of our approach now to be a lot more community engagement, a lot more asset building. You know, a lot more training people of what to look for.
And did you like reach out to SF guys and think that through, or did you kind of take your experiences from Iraq?
I took my experience from Iraq, basically, and I would research certain aspects of UW and kind of pluck out certain things that I liked and then transform it into a more law enforcement friendly.
Make it your own.
Exactly. We sort of made it our own, so which it became very successful.
Yeah.
It became something that, even the chief couldn't. What do you call it? He couldn't even like think of it. Like he's like, you guys did it. Like,
you know what strikes me about you, Iman, is that like I look at your bio, you know, because in this day and age that we live in, with all the Hollywood stuff and the, you know, the door kicking stuff, and I get it. Like it's, you know, it's appealing, right?
Yep.
And the number of people that talk about it on the shows like this, and you know, but you know, you were you know, you not only, you know, local SWAT or you know, municipal SWAT, but SRT with the DEA. I mean, you're highly trained in surgical strike, direct action kind of stuff, right?
Yep.
But yet the preponderance of the stuff you talk about is community engagement. You know, that side of it, and I'm kind of reminded that the best operators I ever worked around in these trust depleted areas were the absolute best fighters on the planet. Their martial skills were so good and they trained so hard, but they never really talked about it. They certainly didn't lead with it, you know, and they didn't even really, I mean, you just knew they could take care of business. Either you'd seen them train, but you also, just by the way they carried themselves, it was a baseline foundational reality. You knew that they could take care of business. Everybody did. But that's not what they led with. And it just was not, you know, my old saying that I love to, it's not my saying, but I love to use it, is if the only tool in your kit bag is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail.
Exactly.
You know, and so did you find that to be kind of the reality for you in your journey in law enforcement, that it was more defined by how you engaged people?
Oh yeah.
Than the coercion stuff?
Absolutely.
Because you worked in some rough areas, man.
Yeah. So I didn't find that coercion works. Right. So it especially like forced coercion or anything like that. To me, it was just connecting with humans, man. Connected on the human level. I would tell like even hardened criminals, like, I'm like, listen, ignore the badge, man. We're talking man to man now. Like, again, like I told you last night, like, you know, over dinner, I'm like, if you told me you raped a child, we're gonna have a different conversation. But most people in my career that I've run into are more or less victim circumstance.
Including when you were undercover?
Including when I was undercover. Just victims of circumstance, whether it be opioid crisis, you know, they got into a car accident, they got hooked on pills, now the pills aren't around anymore, and now they get hooked on heroin, start breaking into things, start doing this, that, the other, and I'm like, you're a victim of society.
I found the same thing when we were doing village stability operations in Afghanistan, when you would engage, like you would talk to fathers who were being kind of very reluctant as elders to allow us to work in a community, or even when you were talking to young guys that were, you know, Talibs. Once you started to have conversations with them, like, I'm not saying that we didn't end up fighting some of those guys, killing them, capturing them, and they killed some of us, and you know, there was still conflict. But when you're working in that kind of environment, you know, again, the local engagement, one of the things that I found was if I could hear the other person's story, you know, it usually gave me a contextual understanding of options that I never would have thought of if I had just gone in there thumping heads.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. I think in law enforcement, a lot of our training for the past couple decades or more has been really hammer. Be the hammer. And to me, like, there's a time and place to be a hammer, and there's a time, a place to be compassionate. I'm more the hammer side of me is a lot less than the compassionate side of me. So I'm not like, I'm with my SWAT team, we'll do things or whatever, and you know, it's fun, it's great. Even with DEA, when I did undercover, I'm working, you know, kind of building up their SRT program, helping them build that. You know, it was all great. Like, you know, highly trained. We're doing these freaking high speed shit, and it's so cool. But to me, the harder work or the real work is that community engagement.
I think there's a level of maturity to it, frankly, that, you know, you see when it's just, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of patience. Because it is much easier in terms of your mental state to lead with the coercive approach. You know, it's kind of a default, right? Because we get afraid or we get angry or we get amped up. But to actually be able to, as my buddy Green Beret Rob Williams said in a lot of these settings, is instead of you know reaching for your pistols, you reach across with a handshake. And look, there's a time to reach for your pistol. Like that's not the that's not the point.
Yeah.
The point here that I'm making, and I think you're making too, is that having the maturity to toggle between those things, and trying to put the relationship before the transaction, it takes a lot of work, but the payload is massive.
Well, that's it. So, like, for example, it takes. Yeah, you're right. It takes a lot of work. For example, the chief had me take a city council once in my cruiser. Said, hey, drive him around. He really wants to see what you guys, what the unit does, stuff like that. I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll take him around. It was a weekend, not a big deal. And I went to one of the trailer parks I was, I heavily invested in and working in, and those really bad dude I've been looking for the past couple of weeks. And, I'm driving around, and one of the residents comes out of her trailer. She sees me, and she comes right up to me. She's like, hey, officer. I'm like, hey, what's up? She's like, hey, that dude you've been looking for, he's over there right now. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, he's over there right now. I'm like, okay, thanks. And then spoke to her for a few more minutes. Like, I wasn't in a rush. I'm like, okay, I know where he is. What's going on? What else are you doing? And all that. And, just having a conversation with her. So then, she goes back in her, and I go around the corner, and I make a couple phone calls. I'm like, hey, boys, he's here. I need this. Send a couple units here. I need a patrol guy, patrol, all that. Coordinated an entire direct action, basically, and ended up grabbing him, arresting him, and no issues whatsoever, and took him to the station. And the city councilor was like, that was amazing. Yeah. He's like, how did you do that? I'm like, just talk to people. Yeah. I don't know. Like, I told him, I'm like, there's no real magic formula to it.
Have you ever heard of Operation Ma Bell?
Ma Bell, no.
So this was an operation. It wasn't what it was. I don't think it was actually called this. It might have been. Colonel Higgins will correct me if I'm wrong, but it was a 7th Group mission during Operation Just Cause in Panama in 1989.
Okay, yeah.
When the big armada from the United States goes down into Panama to liberate the country, arrest Noriega, that kind of thing, and they did all that within like 24 hours. There's a massive force that stormed the commandancy and all that, but all of the Panamanian Defense Forces kind of squirted out into the jungles to the various quartels and were holed up there, and so now they were looking at search and destroy missions with the 7th Infantry, the 82nd, the Rangers, and they're going to go out and just basically raise the countryside, cordon and search for the remnants. Yeah. And some 3rd Battalion, 7th Special Forces Group guys that were living in Panama, they were assigned there before the war even started, right? Yeah. They suggested a bottom-up con-op that would basically the first one that went down was Pat Higgins, a major, and several other NCOs flew up on Blackhawks basically to the Chiriquí province in the mountains, and they landed at a school near the quartel. Now, this was before the internet. There was none of that. And basically the company commander, the SF company commander, walks over to a payphone, puts a quarter in it. It doesn't work. The janitor sitting next to the phone for the school and says, it doesn't work. You'll have to go inside. I'll take you inside. He goes inside the school, gets on the principal's phone, and in Spanish calls the commander of the nearby quartel and says, we're here. You got 20 minutes. And then he has, I think it was like a B-2 Spirit do a flyover.
Yeah.
And he has had all your weapons and your guys stack arms on the soccer field. Yeah. We're flying over. Yeah. They fly over with like 9 dudes and roll up an entire brigade or something like that. That was called Operation Ma Bell. They executed that across the country. Yeah. And they effected the surrender of the entire Panamanian Defense Force.
That's awesome.
Right? But it's the same thing you just did. Yeah. And I think that that's actually possible in any situation, even when it's not like martial conflict. Yeah. Like that approach. You can still swing the hammer. Yeah. But it can be within the context of human connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, again, I realized is, throughout my career is keeping myself grounded and keeping myself more on the human side rather than the hammer side really is where the work is. And that's something I try to coach the younger officers now that, I got promoted to sergeant at work. And, a lot of the younger officers, like, they know my story, which I'm like, yeah, what, it is what it is. But I tell them, I said, listen, compassion goes a long way out there. I said, there's a time to be a hammer and there's a time to be a human. I was like, be a human more, But at the same time, keep the safety in the back of your mind. Like, that famous, I think General Mattis says, be nice to everybody, but have a plan to kill them type of thing. But it's like, I'm sitting there, I'm talking to all these people, and it's like deep level connections I'm having with them, and it's being paid back tenfold for several months later.
Oh, the reciprocity is insane.
Yeah.
What you come out of it. Let me ask you this, as we kind of move towards closure on this. You've done a lot of work in some of the roughest places in the Northeast. You've faced both, to include as an undercover cop, SWAT officer, DEA. I talk a lot about the churn, Iman. This division that's happening in the country today. That's really dividing us. That's creating these levels of distrust. Even in the distraction on social media and the 24/7 news, politics, but the way that we're, as Sebastian Younger says, we're treating each other with contempt normally reserved for one's enemies.
Yeah.
What is your take on the churn today in our society? What are you worried about as someone who has spent a lot of time, trying to protect the fabric of our society, has seen the best and the worst in people? What keeps you up at night in regards to the churn in your view of it?
Keeps me up at night is the division.
Yeah.
Like the deep divide that has been created in our society, because it is so dangerous to have, where we've kind of forgotten our us GWAD vets never forget, right?
Right.
But we kind of forgot why we are a nation of why we are a diverse nation. What makes it work?
And this is coming from a 2-time war refugee, Muslim American, who joined the Army and went to war after 9/11, and then a committed career police officer. So you're not making this remark casually.
No. This is like something that I've always felt, for a while now, especially with how the division in the country is. It's like, again, I feel that the more divided we are, the easier target we are.
Oh, I agree. It's like we're a foreign outpost, and we're behaving in a way that makes no sense when bad actors are circling.
Exactly.
It's like being on a life raft with sharks all around us, and we're in a fist fight.
Exactly.
It makes no sense.
No, it does not. And when I was up in Boston, we had the Boston Marathon bombing happen. Yeah. And that really brought the city together. And everyone was like, hell yeah, police is fire. You guys are doing awesome. We caught them in 7 days. All that great stuff. And now it's like, because of that division, it's like, oh no, we forgot about all of that. Yeah. I'm like, no, there are still bad actors up to shit, up to things. And
why do you think that has happened? What do you attribute to the division? Is there anything that you can put your finger on?
Yeah. So for me personally, this is my view, what I saw. Cambridge PD, if you remember a while back, arrested one of President Obama's friends. This was, I forget what year that was. That was early on in my law enforcement career. I think it was 2009, maybe 2000, somewhere around there. And I remember sitting in police headquarters, and we're watching the news of President Obama up there, and he made the comment, well, the police acted stupidly. And right there, all of us were like, it's done.
Yeah.
Like, this job has just changed as soon as he said that.
Right.
Because whether he knew he did it or not, caused a division right away in the community. Because it turned into, see, we knew it, blah, blah, blah. Cops are idiots, whatever. Even though he was the officer or the detective who arrested President, he was in his right. Like, it was a justified, everything was justified that he did. But when you have the president of a country,
sets the tone,
commander in chief, sets that kind of tone, that's when we knew. And
that's both sides of the aisle.
Exactly.
I see leaders, I call these leaders that do that. I've come up with a term, and it's probably, Colin says it's an art term and I shouldn't use it. I don't care. I'm using it anyway. I call them divisionists.
Yeah.
And the definition I use for that is someone who foments division intentionally, in-group, out-group behavior to advance a narrow agenda.
Exactly. I saw that with Bernie Sanders. I remember watching a video of him, and what he said in this college setting pissed me off to no end. He was in this college setting, and it was a predominantly minority college. And this young college kid asked this question. He said, I feel if I get pulled over, I'm so nervous. Like, to something to that effect, I feel nervous, whatever. And, what can I do? And Bernie Sanders says, he gave him like, oh, be respectful, whatever. And one phrase he said, I'm like, why even say that?
Yeah.
He's like, make sure you respect the officer, otherwise you'll get shot in the back of the head. I'm like,
That's divisionism.
what the like no cop in this country goes into work saying, oh, I'm going to kill some dude today. Like, no one that I know, even like with SWAT, right? Like, when we go after a really bad high value target, right? And threat metrics is like up there, for shooting. And I'll give you a quick story, just one of my personal ones where I nearly shot and killed somebody. It was a really bad guy during COVID.
Yeah.
The DAs across the country were releasing these criminals, really bad people, out of prisons to do whatever with COVID. And this guy is real bad. He was like a gang enforcer in Boston.
Yeah.
So we were tasked. It was a massive SWAT operation. Multiple SWAT teams were involved on this, where the U.S. attorney came in and were like, "Hey, let's start cleaning. Like, let's help. Let's start cleaning up these streets of this, because crime wave was out of control."
Yeah.
I remember one night, my buddy, in Boston, they have a shot spotter. In 2 hours, over 241 shots fired.
Oh my God.
In the shot spotter in one location. And I'm like, dude, that's a firefight.
Yeah.
Like 241, that is a firefight you guys are having in Boston. So we go after this guy. And I remember doing the workup with the SRT commander for DEA. Me and him always did the workups. And doing the workup and doing the threat metrics. And I'm like, dude, we are high 90% rate. We're going to end up getting a shootout with this dude.
Yeah.
So put this plan together to really minimize that. Like, so we obviously, as SWAT operators, we have this, like, obviously any operator, whether it's SF, SWAT, whoever it might be, any operation we do when there's not a shot fired is a successful operation. It means we hit the objective correctly. We did not lose the initiative. We did everything that we did right. Like, everything went the way it should have gone. And as what I do, no matter what op plan you put together, it always changes.
No plan survives the first contact.
Exactly. So, I'll never forget, we roll in, get to the basement. This guy living in his mom's basement. I see him, he sees me. I had a 50-pound shield up because that's how we knew we were going to get into a fight with this guy.
Yeah.
I rush. As soon as I see him peek his head out, ducks back into his bedroom, I'm racing. I'm like, let's go. I have eyes, I yell out, eyes on to the guys behind me, because it was a narrow hallway. Yeah. And I'm a big dude, like, so they're like, I remember the guys behind me, like, dude, we couldn't even see what you were seeing because, you're like broad shouldered and you got the shield up. So I'm like racing to the room. And I see him reaching for a Glock handgun, extended mag, reaching for that. And I literally had my pistol right up against like this. And I'm like, hey, don't you, and I'm squeezing at the same time. I'm like, no, stop. And he stopped, put his hands up. I let go, and, we arrest him. And I'm, in me, like, I was like, holy shit, that was like a near, shooting I had. And by the way, before we even did that op, Boston police detective during our debrief said, hey, the Boston DA is looking at this op heavily, and she's looking to fuck a cop. Like, if anyone messes up. So now I got this in the back of my mind. I'm going in, and I'm about, I might vaporize this dude. And I'm like, man, I might be on the 6 o'clock news as a murderer all of a sudden, because this DA has, again, like you said, divisionist. She has her own agenda and wants to inflict that or put that on somebody. So all that going in the back of my head, I'll never forget, again, because, me and you, we love learning about psychology and stuff like that. My Apple Watch at the time thought I was having a heart attack. My heart rate was at 209. So it's like doing the SOS. I'm like, no, don't call. I'm good. I'm fine. And that's when I started to realize, I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, I was amped up.
Man, speaking of that, that's a great transition into my second to last question to you, which is, as a result of that kind of life, you've lived that kind of life a lot of years, as have a lot of first responders, EMTs, warriors. How do you now manage that? How do you, because, I've spent time with you now, Iman. I've watched how you operate. You do so much for veterans and first responders, your nonprofit work. I mean, you're even down here right now. You just did some amazing nonprofit work, jumping out of a perfectly good airplane with those guys. Like, how have you moved through all of that and continued to play the long game and still be resilient and show up for your son and your wife and the people that you serve, because that's tough, man. That's not an easy thing to do. And I worry about so many of our community who just have given so much, and then, you know, they hit the ground in a heap, you know?
So it's funny that you said that. So it's always a struggle, no matter what. Like, you know, sure, I might be doing all this shit and all this. Trust me, I have dark days.
Yeah.
Regardless of what I might be doing, regardless of what I might be up to, or doing this nonprofit thing or doing that, whatever it might be, I have my dark days.
Yeah.
You know, no matter what. And what keeps me going, though, is knowing that shared suffering.
Right.
Knowing that, well, I'm not the only one, and others need that help, that lost their purpose.
Yeah.
And I want to bring that purpose back to them, just like this airborne course, you know, with X-35 and 22 Mohawks. Like, you know, when it was first born back in 2021, we really didn't have an idea of what to do. And then it sort of morphed into this retreat for veterans.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you are airborne or not, it doesn't matter, you know, because we do a quick course and you jump out of the plane. But it gave you a purpose. And man, I had guys yesterday, veterans, like, you know, come up to give me a huge hug. They're like, thank you so much for this. Thank you so much for this. Like, you know, this is like their first jump ever. And they're like, that was amazing. Like, never felt anything like this before. And, you know, you see their life kind of come back.
Yeah.
And then from there, it's amazing to see what they do after.
You talk about the last night with Ben Owen and me, which really made his eyes light up, because you guys do the same thing from two different sides of the coin.
Yeah.
But you talked about purpose, even when you were talking to drug dealers, is the importance of purpose.
Yes. And that's the thing is, you know, I've kind of discovered my purpose through my experiences is to give it back.
Yeah.
So there was a great, I love Denzel Washington. I think he's a fascinating actor and very good philosopher. Humanitarian. And I was watching this one reel of him saying, first part of life you learn, second part of the life you earn, third part of the life you return.
Yeah, what an amazing human. I love him.
Yeah, I do. So do I. And when he said that, I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, so in my phase right now, I'm getting to that return.
So what is it? Learn, earn, return. That's so good.
And that's kind of like what you're doing, kind of like some of these, you know, some other veterans are doing in our community, and first responders that are doing that. You know, we've all of our lives experiences, you know, we learned it, earned it, right? And earning doesn't mean whether it's money or whatever. It's whatever you did, you learned, you earned, and now you return.
But what I love about what you're doing too, man, and I feel like I'm doing a version of this. I don't think I'm doing it as well as you are, but I do believe that, you know, we as catalysts, you know, connectors, super connectors, it's such a small community that's doing that return kind of stuff. But you find them and you keep bumping into them everywhere, you know, and it's, you talk about, you know, Baconology, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Yeah.
In this world that you and I run in, it's like 1 degree of Kevin Bacon. Like, it's usually one person, you know, knows that person.
Yeah.
And it's a very small community of people that are doing this. But what I really am impressed with you is you've really integrated like self-care, resilience, intention, self-awareness, all of those things in a way that, like, you model it. You don't just talk about it.
Yeah, I try to, and again, like I said, we're all human. We're all capable of making mistakes, and you know, I've made my share of mistakes. I always admit that. You know, I don't hide it whatsoever, and I always say, like, you know, you learn from your mistakes. It's not something, just because I made a mistake doesn't mean that, shit, you know, I can't do this anymore. Now I just keep going. I figure something else out. Or if something didn't work out a certain way, well, I'll kind of go back to the briefing room, figure out a different way of doing it, and then attack it again and go after it. And that's one thing my battalion commander always used to tell me is like, hey, Sarge, always on the attack. Yeah. Like, never on the defense, always on the attack.
I love the way you own the mistake. I try to do that. For example, when I described Operation Ma Bell, I said Major Pat Higgins. It's actually Major Kevin Higgins. Sorry, sir. Both great men. Last question.
Yeah.
You know, there's so many cool things happening in the return category that veterans, first responders, communities are doing. I think it's our last best hope in this country for getting back to better days, to getting to an upswing.
Yeah.
What are you seeing in terms of just, individuals and teams, groups coming together, forming these bottom up, organic kind of movements to do things? Like, are you encouraged by that? What do you see? I feel like it's a really phenomenal thing that's happening in the country right now with this grassroots kind of mobilization around hard problems.
I love it. I'm very proud of the community coming together like we always have in times of crisis. Yeah, because we are in a crisis. We are. We're in a crisis.
Yes, we are.
And
it doesn't end well if we don't step in. And
that's exactly.
And I don't think we can rely on my book, Nobody's Coming to Save You. I mean that. I really don't think there are institutional leaders. I don't care how much faith you put in any one party, you're deluded if you think a political party is going to save your ass. I'm sorry, I don't subscribe to that. No, not as an American in a constitutional republic. Yeah. I don't ever think a politician's going to save me.
No, when you wrote that book and no one's coming, I'm like, man, that is it right there, and that is something that us veterans, first responders know that, because we know how politicians operate.
Yep.
And we know that that's not the way to operate in a free society. And that's why, to me, I'm very proud of, people like you and others that have kind of brought this, again, from the ground up, given voice back to people that need it.
It's an unprecedented time that we live in to be able to do what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
Look at the number of podcasts that are out there. And there's some people that kind of turn their nose up at that and say, well, that's a bunch of amateurs, with a microphone. But I'm like, good. Yeah. Because they're having a conversation and it's a connection. I think that's what we're missing is the human connection, social capital.
It is. And so that's the thing. People ask me like about podcasting and stuff like that. I said, what do you love about it? I'm like, it's the connections, man. It's the networking. It's finding like-minded individuals that I never thought existed, really.
Well, you and I connected through our executive producer, Matt Williams, because he was on your podcast.
Yeah.
And you just think about the number, like you meeting Ben Owens last night, who will also be on this podcast, and you guys will end up doing work in South Memphis.
Yeah.
You bring in your lessons from the New England states.
Yeah.
I mean, and Dr. Kate Pate with all the work that she's done. Yeah. The Baconology is strong in this group. So how can people work with you, learn more about you, be part of the journey that you're on, Iman?
So you can feel free to email me, Iman at projectsapient.com. Project Sapient is my podcast and also my training and consulting sort of LLC. You can always reach out to me on that, and I'm quick to actually. It's funny now. I have another group, Runestone Ranch. I'm meeting with them next week. They're like a group of first responders that created this ranch retreat for first responders dealing with trauma and stuff like that. So people, you can reach out to me like that, and more than happy to work with people who are doing positive things.
And you're still doing all this, and you're still serving in law enforcement.
Yeah. I'm nonstop. my wife, if my wife kills, she's going to kill me if I don't slow myself down. But
yeah, I hope she doesn't meet mine, because then we're both screwed.
Yeah, exactly.
But listen, man, it's just been an honor having you on. I mean, it's one of those things in your life where you meet somebody that you're just going to run a lot of miles with, and I feel that way with you.
Same, likewise.
And I'm just so grateful for what you're doing, and I'm just relieved that you're out there doing what you do, and I mean it when I tell you, whatever you need, Task Force Pineapple or my voice, man, we're here.
Absolutely.
So thank
you,
brother.
Appreciate it.
All right, man.
I appreciate
you for being on.
Yeah,
all right,
absolutely.
Take care. All right, everybody. That's going to wrap up this episode of the Scott Mann Podcast. Hope you enjoyed the episode. And again, I invite you to share it with folks that could use this message, because I think human connection is something that we could all hear more of. If you like the podcast, leave us a review, and make sure that you encourage folks to subscribe, because we're growing this thing from the grassroots. All right. Until next time, we'll see you on the rooftop.